as if some energy in her body was waiting, trembling. Magic wasn't real, Dan reminded herself. Nothing bad was going to happen. Nothing was going to happen at all. She and Liss took up their black and red candles and brought them together to light the white. The white wicks caught. Immediately, the air in the room was moving. It started as a slow churn, then kicked up into vicious gusts of wind that snaked around them. Adrenaline punched Dan's heartbeat into high gear. The wind roared in her ears, her mouth, her nose, heaving like the waves of the nearby Pacific Ocean. Across from her, Liss's eyes went wide with fear. The wind pressed against them, ropes holding them in the whirlwind, yet somehow neither of them broke off the words of the spell, as if something beyond them were pushing them on, pushing the very words into their mouths. The candles blew out and an absolute darkness filled the room. The ground slid out from under Dan. She was careening, falling, then borne up by that wind, raging and playful and thunderous. She was a leaf carried by a gust. She was a bird in a storm. She was dust in the air. She was carried off in darkness, deeper and deeper. Something was changing inside her, growing and blooming, expanding until it pressed up against the boundary of her skin from within. It squeezed the air from her lungs. The blood in her veins and arteries throbbed against it. It was too much. Too much power, more than she was built for, and if she couldn't contain it. But just in time, it was retreating, the pressure collapsing. Whatever it was that had been growing was now folding in on itself, smaller and smaller, as if this new strange force was concentrating itself inside her. The wind was dying, too, and everything began to still. Dan was afraid to open her eyes. When she finally did, she was sitting on the floor in Liss's bedroom, the rug rolled back. Her heart was racing and jaw clenched, and Liss was there, out of breath. It was moonlit dark in the room, but the world felt stinging and bright, distilled in a way that was almost nauseating. Dan was sure, all at once, that every star in the sky was staring right at them, that the world was paused for them, its breath held, waiting and watching for what they would do. Between them, the book was splayed open, its pages turned lazily, petals from the head of a dying flower caught in the waning wind. They had been blank, but were now crammed with text, diagrams, lists. Dan turned to the first page. Where the text of the spell they had just done should have been, it read, "The Black Book, III." Dan raised her eyes to Liss. Slowly, they both began to grin. "That might have actually worked," Dan whispered. All summer, Dan waited for magic to change her life. She and Liss had transformed themselves, together, so Dan expected to feel different, better. As the long days went by, if anything, she felt worse. Then, the first week of September, Johnny Sue kissed Dan in the parking lot of 7-Eleven. Pressing her up against the dull silver paint of his third-hand Volvo, Johnny smelled like weed and Doritos, and a particular kind of shampoo, and Dan wondered if she could learn to like that strange combination, or the strange feeling of his tongue in her mouth. It was her first kiss. It lasted only a few moments, but as they pulled apart and he laughed his bashful, charming laugh, Dan wondered if maybe it wasn't magic that would change things. Maybe it was this. She had been halfway right. By the middle of October, Liss was dating Johnny. 4 months after that, Johnny was gone. His car abandoned where Hare Creek Road crossed Escondido in a perfect X. The police called him a runaway, or maybe a suicide. Dan and Liss knew better. Johnny wasn't just missing. He'd been taken into the cold February night by something the girls didn't understand. But magic gone wrong wasn't the kind of thing you explained to the police, or to anyone else. Not when you didn't know what kind of creature had stolen him away, where they had gone, or whether Johnny was alive.